Io si ignorano
Akun.
il cellulare
Squalo.
dovresti andare sulla forma. Sì.
Skip it. Like onwards.
Eh?
Onwards.
Sai che si soffrono che sono il movimento anche vedere non si vede. عشان من الحديث في وقت اللي ندخل صبحي إذا تفينيش تعي تتغير الله Islam stresses more this because not even كيف أنا دخل صبحي
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم نحمده ونصلي على رسوله الكريم أما بعد. Then Maulana Sahib mentions some very nice points regarding our sisters, especially about Islam's injunctions with regards to modesty and how we should ensure that we try to dress in a modest fashion. We try to ensure that our speech is in a modest fashion when inside the home and also in public, especially when leaving the home. We know that Islam presents and has different guidelines for women when it comes to clothing, in terms of hijab and niqab. So it's important that we abide by these laws, and it's important that we don't be lax when it comes to our modesty, when it comes to our clothing. He also mentioned some nice proofs regarding wearing a face veil. Now, the Islamic scholars state that it is compulsory for a woman to cover her face in the presence of strange men, and they base their view on the following proofs. Number one, the Quran instructs women to wear a jilbab, which covers the entire body, including the face. Number two, the Quran commands women not to stamp their feet, because this may reveal their hidden beauty in the form of ankle bracelets, jingling jewelry, etc. As such, stamping of the feet tempts men and stimulates desires, even if they do not know the age, identity, or beauty of a woman. When stamping of the feet tempts men, a beautiful face will surely do so to a greater extent. Number three, the Sahaba radiallahu anhum stated that women during the era of Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam would cover their faces, leaving only one eye open to see. Number four, when a woman is described as beautiful, it means that her face is beautiful. If her face is not beautiful, she is not regarded by men as beautiful. Hence, the verse of the Quran commanding the covering of her beauty, her zina, has to necessarily include the face. The Sahabiyat have stated that they would cover their faces while in ihram if men happen to pass by them. The hadith which mentions the incident when Aisha radiallahu anha was slandered states that when she noticed Safwan bin Mu'attal radiallahu anhu, she said, فَخَمَّرْتُ وَجْهِي بِجِلْبَابِي, I drew my jilbab over my face. Like that, many other points are mentioned by Maulana Sahib. We'll move to the chapter on why Islam stresses upon modesty. Islam recognizes that man is composed of body and soul. Man possesses both angelic qualities and animalistic qualities. If his animalistic qualities are left uncontrolled, he commits such indecencies that cause him to sink to a level lower than that of animals. On the contrary, if he cultivates qualities of piety, morality, modesty, purity, and chastity within himself, he may even surpass the status of the angels. Those who become slaves to carnal desires and materialistic pleasures are doomed to a life of restlessness, because these qualities are insatiable by nature when left unharnessed. A mind that is overpowered by sexual thoughts and desires and bombarded with sexual stimulants from all sides cannot find the peace of mind and tranquility for constructive and creative work. For this reason, Islam harnesses man's sexual energy by moral discipline and confines it to marriage so that it is conducive to the development of a clean and righteous culture. Islam teaches the purpose of the creation of man. Islam teaches that the purpose of the creation of man is not limited to a sexual relationship, because this reduces him to the level of animals. He should aspire to higher and more uplifting purposes in order to live a sublime and refined life on earth. Such goals include the worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, perfection of character, and global service to humanity. The Islamic laws of modesty are often unfairly portrayed as instruments of oppression and suppression. In reality, these laws aim to keep the social environment pure from all forms of sexual stimulation so that both men and women can develop their mental and spiritual abilities in a peaceful atmosphere and thereby build a healthy society. The rationale behind the subtler commands of Islamic modesty is that no man or woman is ever free from the clutches of shaitan. Being the devil that he is always plotting to trap them in any way possible and lure their hearts towards each other so that they may commit acts of debauchery and licentiousness. This unrelenting effort of shaitan on the human soul has been summarized by Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam in the statement, "Verily, shaitan runs through a person like the running of blood through his veins," narrated by Imam Bukhari. In the backdrop of Western civilization, where immodesty is encouraged rather than condemned, the Islamic laws of modesty are a breath of fresh air. These laws are divinely prescribed and the only basis for a successful social setup because they are in harmony with nature. This divine code of discipline has been devised by the Creator with utmost wisdom and with full knowledge of human psychology. It has produced excellent results whenever it was adopted over the span of 1400 years. It has not led to even the slightest of evils that has been exalted by the morally decadent Western culture during the short span of just 100 years. The control of the gaze is paramount in the prevention of evil because it is the first rung on the ladder of adultery. The eyes are the medium through which images and signals are relayed to the brain, which then triggers a series of emotional reactions. For this reason, Islam commands both men and women to control their gazes. This command is particularly important for men because gait, manner, and appearance of a woman have magnetic power. Many women have been deceived into believing that their honor and respect lies in them attracting the lustful gazes of strange men. The truth is that such gazes only bring them disgrace and humiliation. Having recognized the powerful enticing force of female beauty, Islam has restricted her display of adornments to a limited circle of family, such as husband, father, grandfather, brothers, children, grandchildren, and uncles, in order to minimize the chances of emotional excitement or stimulation. It is a natural tendency in men to be attracted and drawn towards feminine beauty, and shaitan exploits this weakness to the maximum. Even if a pious man of the caliber of Hassan Basri rahmatullahi alayh and a pious woman of the caliber of Rabia Basriya rahimahullah were to be together in private, then too would shaitan attempt to weave his ploy. For this reason, both men and women are instructed to abide by a moral code of law regarding their demeanor, dress, body language, and words. The importance of modesty in Islam can be best understood by the noble proclamation of Yusuf alayhi salam when he was invited to fulfill his desires with a woman of beauty and power. As the Quran relates, رَبِّ السِّجْنُ أَحَبُّ إِلَيَّ مِمَّا يَدْعُونَنِي إِلَيْهِ, prison is more beloved to me than that adultery to which they call me. The urge to cover the human body is not a teaching of primitive and outdated culture. Rather, it is an innate quality in man. Hence, the Quran tells us that Adam alayhi salam and Hawa alayhi salam rushed to cover themselves with leaves when their bodies were exposed in Jannah. In fact, exposing the body is a contributory factor towards promoting obscenity and promiscuity in any society. If this urge is given free rein, it will find expression in any and every possible way. For this reason, we nowadays see women flaunting their beauty through every inch of their body's attire and behavior. The fact that the Western world strives on such exposure speaks volumes of their culture. The effects of intermingling. Islam separates the spheres of activity of men and women because their natural sexual attraction which exists between the sexes becomes stronger and transgresses acceptable limits due to stimulation it receives every time the sexes intermingle. When they intermingle, they are prone to be led by their sentiments towards each other rather than sharing their intellect, because this urge in each gender for the other is always dominant and anxious to find an outlet. Proof of this is the relationships that develop at universities, colleges, school, workplaces, in fact, any place where the two genders mix. The fact that Islam has absolved women of worship in congregation and performing salah in the masajid leads us to the conclusion that their sphere of activity should be in the homes. Furthermore, it is reasonable to assume that emotions are absent or greatly suppressed while performing salah in the masjid. But Islam has still prohibited intermingling in this sacred environment. What can then be said about intermingling in offices, factories, corporate environments, educational institutes, shops, malls, parks, and places of entertainment? Free intermingling of both genders is also problematic because it gives rise to an inclination to appear as attractive as possible to the opposite gender. In addition, free intermingling robs men and women of their dignity. A modest and respectable spouse will never be at ease knowing that his partner is rubbing shoulders, shaking hands, or speaking freely with members of the opposite gender. Intermingling often poses unexpected problems for women because many people have diseased hearts. Even if a woman desires purity of heart for herself, she can never guarantee that her male associates, friends, and colleagues desire the same purity. She may therefore be treated disrespectfully or asked a distasteful question in a gathering, causing her embarrassment. Intermingling is also problematic because prevalent culture encourages maintaining eye contact during conversation to enhance a communication. Hence, if a Muslim woman rightfully does not maintain eye contact with a man, she is perceived to be as a poor listener or rude, whereas none of this pretentious belief is true. Similarly, a dominant culture teaches her that her body language needs to be friendly, while the Islamic laws of modesty teach the opposite. Even the West has to a degree realized that men and women have certain sensitivities in relation to each other. Hence, they provide separate bathrooms for males and females. In some countries, there are separate gender schools because educators feel that this facilitates the learning process. An advantage of men and women working in different spheres is that they can view each other's circumstances objectively, without personal involvement or emotion. A case in point is when Salama radiallahu anha, the wife of Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam, gave him some sound advice at the Treaty of Hudaybiyah. The Sahaba radiallahu anhum were disappointed that they were deprived of performing the Umrah. When Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam issued the command for them to slaughter their animals and shave their hair, none of them moved an inch. He went to Salama radiallahu anha and explained to her what had transpired. She wisely advised, go out yourself and without saying a word to anybody, slaughter your animal and get your barber to shave your head. Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam followed her advice, and when the Sahaba radiallahu anhum saw him slaughtering his animal and shaving his head, they followed suit. Due to her being separated from the other Sahaba radiallahu anhum, she viewed matters differently and gave him sound advice which he acted upon. In essence, Islam maintains that a woman should not associate with everyone. Just as precious jewels are concealed, a woman should conceal her beauty from the gazes of men. Some objections to Islamic modesty. Some people claim that the laws of hijab do not apply to them because their hearts and minds are clean. Firstly, the reality is that no matter how innocent and pure a person might feel, Shaitan excites his or her passions, leading him or her to evil thoughts and sins. Secondly, the pure wives of Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam, the Azwaji Mutahharat, were ordered to observe hijab from non-mahrams. These blessed women reached the highest ranks of piety, and their homes were the noble abodes where revelation descended. Even the Quran testifies to their greatness. The fact that they were ordered to observe strict hijab despite their noble status and purity emphasizes the need for other Muslim women to emulate them without any reservation. Thirdly, if one's heart is clean, can one guarantee that others' hearts are also clean? Fourthly, the messengers of Allah were the purest of all people. However, even Yusuf alayhi salam said in the Quran, I do not claim innocence for myself. Surely the lower self, the nafs, strongly commands evil. Further, any culture which allows freedom between the genders on assumption that people's hearts are clean is oblivious of reality. This instinct, sexual instinct, and natural attraction between men and women is arguably the strongest instinct in man. It is like placing butter next to a fire and hoping that it will not melt. It is tantamount to placing a pot of water on a burning fire and hoping that it will not boil over, or placing dynamite in a fire and hoping that it will not explode. The Islamic view is that attraction between men and women exists, and if left unbridled, it has the potential to break down the moral fabric of society. It is known that when desires of a person erupt, they are almost impossible to control. In support of this idea, Maulana Jalaluddin Rumi rahimahullah in his masterpiece, the Mathnawi, mentions the story of a snake catcher who once went into a snow-laden mountainous area and found a huge snake that had been frozen. Thinking it to be dead, he brought it back to Baghdad in order to show it to the people and make some money. But when he brought it into the warm sunlight of the city, it was revived and attacked the people. The moral of the story is that man should always be careful of the dangers that lurk within his nafs, within his lower self. Just as the snake came to life when it got the opportunity, the fire of lust and passion in a man will ignite at the slightest opportunity. Man should never feel contented that he is in control of his nafs, he is in control of his lower self, but regard it as his deadliest enemy. In another story, Maulana Jalaluddin Rumi rahimahullah mentions the tale of a man who saved a bear from the fangs of a large serpent. The bear was so thankful for his kind gesture that he began following the man. The bear served him like a slave and protected him from harm. One day, as he lay asleep beneath a tree, the bear was driving away the flies from his face. But the flies were so persistent that the bear lost his patience. He seized a huge rock and flung it at the flies in order to kill them. But the rock struck the man's face and crushed it completely, killing him. One of the many morals contained in this story is that a man should never trust his lower self, thinking that it is under his control. Just as a man cannot befriend a bear, man should never regard his carnal desires as his friend. Number 2. There are those who argue that the laws of Islamic modesty apply more restrictions upon women than men. They assert that these laws have been coined by chauvinistic men in order to subjugate women. While the assertion of women having more laws upon them is true, this concept was not coined by men, but is laid down by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran. Verses 30 and 31 of Surah An-Nur, as well as all the other commands in this surah and in Surah Al-Ahzab dealing with issues of female modesty, provide ample evidence to prove this point. The objective of these verses is to prevent immorality by encouraging purity and chastity. It is certainly not to objectify women or reduce them to the level of sexual beings. Number 3. Some people also object that Islam's institution of hijab creates undue emphasis on a woman's external appearance. This line of thinking suggests that a woman needs to be appreciated for her intellect and personality rather than her external self. This argument holds no real weight, because in reality women who expose their beauty in public seek to draw attention to themselves by ostentatiously displaying their enthralling external beauty. Furthermore, the carnal desires of a man leads him to focus primarily on a woman's external beauty before he can appreciate her intellect. This is but a cover-up, a feeble alibi, a lame excuse. The predominant culture argues that just as the sweet smell of a rose may be appreciated by many, it is perfectly acceptable for the beauty and charms of a woman to be appreciated by many men. This thinking is defective, because it ignores the fact that a rose loses its beauty each time it is handled. Similarly, a woman loses her beauty and value when she frequently exposes herself to strange men. A dialogue between a flower and a pearl touches on this vital aspect. One day, a brilliant, beautiful and fragrant flower with attractive colors met a pearl that dwells at the bottom of the ocean. They got acquainted with each other. The flower said, "Our family is large. Roses and daisies are members of the family, and there are many other species that are various and countless. Each has its distinctive scent, appearance, etc." But then a tinge of distress appeared on the flower. The pearl asked, "Nothing accounts for sorrow in your talk, so why are you depressed?" The flower replied, "Human beings deal with us carelessly. They humiliate us. They don't grow us for our sake, but to get pleasure from our fragrance and beautiful appearance. They throw us on the street or in the garbage can after we are dispossessed of our most valuable properties, brilliance and fragrance." The flower sighed. The flower then asked the pearl, "Tell me about your life. How do you live? How do you feel? You are buried at the bottom of the sea." The pearl answered, "Although I have none of your distinctive colors and sweet scents, humans think I am precious. They do the impossible to procure me. They go on long journeys, dive deep into the seas searching for me. You might be astounded to know that the further I lay, the more beautiful and brilliant I become. That's what increases my value in their sight. I live in a thick shell, isolated in the dark seas. However, I am happy and proud to be in a safe zone, far from wanton and mischievous hands. and I am content that humans consider me highly valuable. The flower symbolizes an unveiled woman who shows off her beauty, while the pearl symbolizes a veiled woman who conceals her beauty. Some incidents of modest women. Number 1, 2 women in the era of Hazrat Musa alayhi salam. In the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions the incident of Musa alayhi salam when he fled from Fir'aun. Upon reaching Madian, he came across a group of men who were watering their flock. At a distance, he noticed 2 women who were sitting apart from the men. Musa alayhi salam asked the women why they were not watering their animals. As the Quran states, they briefly replied, "Our father is an old man." Their reply meant that their father could not water the animals himself, so they were forced to do it for him. But being the weaker and the fairer of the 2 genders, they had to wait for the shepherds to do so first. Musa alayhi salam watered their animals for them, and the women then returned home. Later, one of the women returned and told Musa alayhi salam that her father wanted to see him in order to repay him for his kindness. The Holy Quran describes that her walk was modest. This incident teaches us a number of lessons. Firstly, that women did not intermingle with men. Secondly, the women explained that they had emerged from their home due to necessity because their father was an old man and could not water the flock himself. By their reply, they alluded that the focal point of the activity of a woman should be their home. Thirdly, their reply to Musa alayhi salam was very brief, teaching us that modest women feel uneasy to talk freely with strange men. Fourthly, the woman's modest walk was so beloved to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He highlighted it in the Holy Quran. Fifthly, as soon as the daughters found a suitable employee, they suggested to their father to employ him so that they could remain at home. Number 2, Hazrat Aisha radiallahu anha. The incident of Aisha radiallahu anha, who was falsely accused of adultery by the hypocrites, is mentioned in the Holy Quran and various books of ahadith, including Bukhari and Muslim. She was traveling with Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam and had left her palanquin on the camel to answer the call of nature. When she returned, she realized that she had mistakenly dropped her necklace and went back to find it. The caravan departed without realizing that she was missing. When she realized that she was stranded, she sat down and fell asleep. Hazrat Safwan bin Mu'attal radiallahu anhu, who had been deputed to follow behind the army, noticed her and expressed his surprise. When Aisha radiallahu anha saw him, she immediately covered her face with her jilbab. He then allowed her to sit on his camel and led her until they joined the caravan. She said, "We never spoke a word, and I never heard him saying a word except Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un." This incident teaches a number of lessons which are relevant to this discussion. Firstly, the women were separated from the men by sitting in palanquins when they traveled. Secondly, the men who lifted the palanquin and rode away with it clearly had no conversation with Hazrat Aisha radiallahu anha, because if they did, they would have realized that she was absent. Thirdly, Aisha radiallahu anha covered her face as a spontaneous response to a strange man, pointing to her modesty. Fourthly, Aisha radiallahu anha and Safwan bin Mu'attal radiallahu anh never said a word to each other in conformity with the Islamic directive of prohibiting strange men and women from unnecessary discussions. Fifthly, Aisha radiallahu anha herself mentioned that he recognized her when he saw her as he had seen her prior to the revelation of the command of hijab. In other words, no strange man had seen her face after the command of hijab was revealed. Sixthly, he recited Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un to wake her up without having to address her directly. In summary, all of these points indicate that there was a great degree of modesty governed by clear segregation of the genders. Number 3, Hazrat Fatima radiallahu anha. Once Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam asked the Sahaba, what was the best thing for women? None of the Sahaba could provide an answer to Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam in that gathering. When Ali radiallahu anhu returned home and informed Hazrat Fatima radiallahu anha about the question Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam had posed to the Sahaba, she spontaneously answered, "The best thing for women and most beloved in the sight of Allah is that women do not see men and that men do not see women." When Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam was informed of her response, he said, "Fatima is a part of me." Fatima radiallahu anha was concerned about her modesty throughout her life and even at the time of her death. During her final illness, she said to Asma bint Umays radiallahu anha, "I dislike what happens to women after they pass away. They are covered in a cloth which allows their bodies to be viewed and described." Asma bint Umays radiallahu anha said to her, "Would you like to know what I saw in the land of Abyssinia? Would you like to know?" She then asked for some fresh branches of a palm tree, bent them into a shape, and threw a piece of cloth over them. Fatima radiallahu anha said, "This is excellent." She also made a bequest that she be buried at night, and her wish was fulfilled. These incidents show how modest Hazrat Fatima radiallahu anha was, and how much importance she gave to the fact that her modesty should be preserved even after her demise. Khallad radiallahu anha. The story of the Sahabiya by the name of Khallad radiallahu anha, who was martyred. When she heard about it, she came to Nabi, her son was martyred, I believe. When she heard about it, she came to Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam to inquire about his position and reward. Despite being afflicted by the great tragedy of losing her son, her face was still covered with a niqab. A Sahabi was quite astonished by this and remarked, "You have come to inquire about your son, yet you have covered your face at this tragic moment." She replied, "I may have lost my son, but I have not lost my modesty." Note, what great words and what a great lesson. Losing her son was tolerable, but removing her niqab and exposing her face was intolerable. This was the modesty of the women of this ummah. This incident and the one before clearly explain that covering the face for a woman is also an injunction of deen, and not just some custom as some so-called bright thinkers may promote. Another critical issue that stands out in this hadith is that although she came before Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, her face was covered. Unfortunately today, a trend which is becoming common in our communities is that women are attending Arabic and tafsir classes or other Islamic courses and lectures, and there is no screen between them and the speaker. Many marriages have been badly affected in this way. How can a man allow his wife to attend such a program, even if it is done in the name of deen? Hazrat Asma radiallahu anha. Asma radiallahu anha was the respected sister of Hazrat Aisha.
बहुत अच्छे पॉइंट बयान कर रहे हैं, बहुत अच्छी दलील है। ये लोग जो हिजाब पर इश्काल करते हैं बिल्कुल खामोश कर दिया है माशाअल्लाह। कोई करो
Hazrat Asma radiallahu anha. Asma radiallahu anha, the respected sister of Aisha radiallahu anha, entered the home wearing a thin garment. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam immediately turned away from her and corrected her by explaining to her that she should not wear such a thin clothing, as it is insufficient in concealing her body. This lesson of shyness in clothing taught by Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam was so deeply entrenched in the heart of Asma radiallahu anha that she remained particularly concerned regarding modesty in her dressing until the end of her life. Hence, when she reached old age, her son, Munzir bin Zubayr rahimahullah, after returning from Iraq, sent her a cloth of very fine and superior quality as a gift. She had lost her sight, so she held the fabric in her hand, feeling it carefully. She then said, "Return the cloth to him." When the cloth was returned to Munzir, he felt hurt as his beloved mother had returned his gift and said to her, "O my beloved mother, the cloth is not transparent, so it is fine for you to wear." Hazrat Asma radiallahu anha replied, "It may not be transparent, but it will still reveal the shape of the body due to it being tight-fitting." Understanding the reason for his mother's disapproval, he thereafter brought her common garments. She happily accepted them, saying, "It is these types of garments that you should give me to wear." Asma radiallahu anha gives us total insight of what the clothing of a Muslim should be, and she sets the standard for it. She explains that the garment being non-transparent is not the only issue about clothing. Rather, it is equally essential for it not to be tight-fitting and body-hugging. It must not only be a black cloak or a black scarf, but it must be an item of clothing that does not describe the figure of the woman and does not hold any attraction. A few incidents of immoral people. Unuq. This
यूनुस साहब ने मुझे फरमाया ये हमारी बच्चियां काला बुर्का पहनती हैं, तो ये काला कोई इस्लामी रिवाज नहीं है। तो कोई भी कलर, लेकिन वो उसके जिस्म को छुपाने वाला रंग हो, चाहे कोई भी कलर हो, डार्क ग्रीन हो, डार्क रेड हो, और इस तरह के डार्क ब्राउन कलर होता है। तो ब्लैक कोई इस्लामिक कलर नहीं है। कोई अच्छा कलर हो जिससे जिस्म अच्छी तरह छुपा रहे, ऐसा कपड़ा पहनना चाहिए। और जैसे फरमाया वो टाइट ना हो, फिर उस पर बहुत ज्यादा एम्ब्रॉयडरी वगैरह ना हो, क्योंकि वो तो बुढ़ी को भी जवान बना देता है ऐसा बुर्का। अंदर से बुढ़ी है और ऊपर से एम्ब्रॉयडरी वाला बुर्का पहन लिया तो जवान बन गई, अट्रैक्शन हो गया ना। तो वो अट्रैक्शन नहीं होना चाहिए, मकसद छुपाना है जिस्म को। चलो। A
few incidents of immoral people. Number one, unuq. This woman lived in the era of Adam alayhi salam. She is the first person to commit adultery and thereby she is the first person to commit adultery and thereby disgrace herself. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala punished her in this world by sending huge snakes as big as elephants, huge scorpions as big as camels, and huge vultures as big as donkeys from the unseen. They all came up and ate her up together. Number 2, the wife of Lut alayhi salam. She was also a disbeliever, and she used to help the disbelievers in their evil ways. When the time approached for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to send his punishment on the non-believers, he sent angels to inform Lut alayhi salam. They said to him, leave your residence the following morning, because the punishment of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is about to descend on this village. Take the believers with you and leave this village on this very night. No one should look back at the village. Acting on the orders of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Lut alayhi salam left his village. This woman also joined them in order to save her life. When the time came for the punishment of this village, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala caused stones to rain down on them, and there was a great uproar. All the believers lowered their heads out of fear and continued on their way. No one looked around. However, this woman, who had relatives among the disbelievers and whose way of life was just like theirs, looked around to see what was happening to those people. The moment she turned around, a stone pelted her and she fell down dead. Is'af and Na'ilah. There was a tribe by the name of Jurhum, which had settled down in Mecca when Ismail alayhi salam was still a child. A woman by the name of Na'ilah belonged to this tribe. She had the audacity of committing adultery inside the Kaaba. Allah's punishment descended on her and the man who had committed this sinful act, and they both turned into stone. The name of this man was Isaf. The people carried them to Safa and Marwa and placed one of them on Safa and one of them on Marwa. They did this so that the people will look at them and fear the punishment of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They remained there for a long time. Eventually, a time came when ignorant people began worshipping these two statues out of stupidity. It is for this reason that when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam came, he had them removed and destroyed. The king and his wife who killed a Nabi. There was a king who had a wife that had been married previously. This woman had a daughter from her previous marriage. When this woman became old, she felt that her husband, the king, would most probably become attracted to another woman. She therefore decided to get this daughter of hers married to her husband. She even got her daughter to agree to this liaison. This daughter also began making plans to attract the king towards her with various strategies. When eventually he became attracted to her, Yahya alayhi salam heard about this. He tried to stop the king from marrying this woman's daughter. However, all three of them became his enemies and had him captured, brought before him and beheaded. After this, the king decided to commit the prohibited act with his stepdaughter of his. Yahya alayhi salam's severed head began speaking and said, "O you fool, she is not halal for you." But this wicked king paid no heed. Upon this, the blood from inside the head of Yahya alayhi salam began to boil and overflow and did not subside. The ulama of that time said that as long as the blood of his killer is not made to flow, i.e. as long as they are not killed, this blood will not subside. There was a king of another neighboring land. When he heard about this, he invaded this place and killed all the killers of Yahya alayhi salam along with 70 other disbelievers. Only then did the flowing of that blood subside. A deceitful woman from Bani Israel. Musa alayhi salam filled a well with water and made such a dua that the water had such an effect that if an immoral woman had to drink that water, her face would turn black in color and she would die immediately. The effect of this water remained even after the demise of Musa alayhi salam. Once a person suspected his wife of adultery. Suspicion proved true with the passage of time. When the husband began talking about this to the judges of that time, they gave a ruling that she should drink the water from that well after summoning her. She had an identical twin sister, and people had much trouble distinguishing the two. This woman deluded her sister into going on her behalf. She went and drank the water in the presence of everyone. Since she was pure, nothing happened to her, and all the people were surprised. However, when she went home and met her impure sister, the moment her breath touched her, her entire face turned black. She died there and then, and everyone came to know of her treachery. Two major enemies, following of the desires and following of shaitan. The nafs and shaitan. Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhuma said, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has not mentioned hawa, desires, anywhere in the noble Quran except that He has condemned it. Study the following verses wherein Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks of the evil consequences of following one's desires. وَاتَّبَعَ هَوَاهُ فَمَثَلُهُ كَمَثَلِ الْكَلْبِ. And he followed his desires, so his example is that of a dog. بَلِ اتَّبَعَ الَّذِينَ ظَلَمُوا أَهْوَاءَهُمْ بِغَيْرِ عِلْمٍ فَمَنْ يَهْدِي مَنْ أَضَلَّ اللَّهُ. but in fact the oppressors follow their desires without any knowledge. Then who can guide those whom Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has misguided? وَمَنْ أَضَلُّ مِمَّنِ اتَّبَعَ هَوَاهُ بِغَيْرِ هُدًى مِنَ اللَّهِ. Who can be more misguided than the one who follows his desires without any guidance from Allah? وَلَا تَتَّبِعِ الْهَوَى فَيُضِلَّكَ عَنْ سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ. And do not follow your desires, it will turn you away from the path of Allah. أَفَرَأَيْتَ مَنِ اتَّخَذَ إِلَهَهُ هَوَى وَأَضَلَّهُ اللَّهُ عَلَى عِلْمٍ. Then have you seen the one who takes his desires as a deity, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala leads him astray despite having knowledge? وَاتَّبَعَ هَوَاهُ فَتَرْدَى. And he followed his desires.
Hawa means carnal desires. Khahishat-e-nafs. Our Hazrat once mentioned the Shah Wasiyullah Ilahabadi Rahmatullah Ali was once coming for Jummah and he had to do bayan before Jummah. So as he entered the masjid, he met this Haji Sahib. He was entering masjid as well. He said, Haji Sahib, kya haal hai? Khairiyat se hain? And Haji Sahib had some gas problem. So he said, nahi Hazrat, ye kya karu? Ye hawa ne badi musibat kar di. Gas. He meant gas. So he said, ye hawa, ye pet mein hawa bhari hui hai. This hawa in my stomach is giving me trouble. So when he said, Hazrat, ye hawa ne badi musibat kar rakhi hai, Shah Wasiullah said, oh, I was thinking about some topic for bayan, you giving me topic now. I'll talk about hawa nafs. So he was talking about gas and Shah Wasiullah said, did bayan of hawa nafs. Chaliye.
Sha'bi rahimahullah states, إنما سمي الهوى هوى لأنه يهوي بصاحبه في النار. Hawa, carnal desires, have been called so because they drop the person of desires into the fire. In the hadith also, one is prohibited from following one's desires. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, an intelligent person is he who keeps an eye on his nafs and does actions for life after death, whereas a foolish person is he who follows the desires of his nafs and then places hope on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Narrated by Imam Tirmidhi. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, three qualities are destructive: greed which is obeyed, desires which are followed, and a person who is self-conceited. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, I fear three things for my followers: the slip of a scholar, desires which are obeyed, and the rule of an oppressor. Abu Darda radiallahu anhu said, had it not been for three qualities, the matters of people would have been correct: greed which is obeyed, desires which are followed, and a person who is self-conceited. Umar radiallahu anhu said, restrain these souls from their desires because they are constantly in search for the fulfillment of desires. If you do not restrain them, they will drag you to a terrible end. The consequence of truth is praiseworthy, while the consequence of falsehood is disastrous. Abstaining from sin is better than treating it with repentance. Many a gaze gave rise to passion, and a single moment's passion caused a lengthy grief. Some of the pious people have mentioned, مَا عُبِدَ إِلَهٌ فِي الْأَرْضِ أَبْغَضُ عَلَى اللَّهِ تَعَالَى مِنَ الْهَوَى. There is no deity worshipped on the surface of earth more disliked by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala than the deity of desires. By following one's desires, one will completely destroy oneself, or it will cause one to become disgraced, and one's name will be blemished. It is quite possible that both these things will happen to one. History bears witness to the fact that whoever became a slave to his passions and desires was completely destroyed. The accursed Iblis, our enemy from time immemorial, fell into the trap of his nafs and became distant of the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There was no other Iblis to turn him away from the straight path. It was his nafs which led him astray. Since Iblis has made a firm pledge to destroy man through his experience, he has not found a better friend, a better spy and agent than the nafs. Bishri Hafi rahimahullah said, 60 shayateen cannot cause so much harm as one evil companion can cause in one moment. And 60 evil companions cannot cause so much harm as the nafs can do in one moment. The second major enemy trying to destroy man is shaitan. In the noble Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has in many places mentioned the deceptions of shaitan. Hereunder are a few places. إِنَّ الشَّيْطَانَ لَكُمْ عَدُوٌ فَاتَّخِذُوهُ عَدُوًّا إِنَّمَا يَدْعُو حِزْبَهُ لِيَكُونُوا مِنْ أَصْحَابِ السَّعِيرِ. Verily, shaitan is your enemy, then regard him as your enemy. He calls his group so that they can be from the dwellers of the blazing fire. كَمَثَلِ الشَّيْطَانِ إِذْ قَالَ لِلْإِنسَانِ اكْفُرْ فَلَمَّا كَفَرَ قَالَ إِنِّي بَرِيءٌ مِّنْكَ إِنِّي أَخَافُ اللَّهَ رَبَّ الْعَالَمِينَ. Like shaitan, when he says to a man, become a disbeliever. When he disbelieves, shaitan says, Verily I am free from you. Verily I fear Allah, the sustainer of the universe. وقال الشيطان لما قضي الأمر إن الله وعدكم وعد الحق ووعدتكم فأخلفتكم وما كان لي عليكم من سلطان إلا أن دعوتكم فاستجبتم لي فلا تلوموني ولوموا أنفسكم ما أنا بمصرخكم وما أنتم بمصرخي إني كفرت بما أشركتموني من قبل إن الظالمين لهم عذاب أليم. Shaitan will say when the matter is decided, surely Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had made a true promise to you, and I also made a promise to you, but I deceived you. I had no authority over you except that I called you and you responded to my call. Hence, do not blame me but blame yourselves. I cannot respond to your cries, nor can you respond to mine. I deny your having associated me with Allah before this. Surely those who are wrongdoers, for them is a painful punishment. يا أيها الناس إن وعد الله حق فلا تغرنكم الحياة الدنيا ولا يغرنكم بالله الغرور. O people, verily the promise of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is true. Let not the worldly life deceive you, and let not the great deceiver, meaning shaitan, deceive you regarding Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Shaitan took an oath and told Adam alayhi salam, Inni lakuma lamina nasihin. Verily I am from those who wish well for you. What will be man's condition when he has taken an oath to mislead man? قَالَ فَبِعِزَّتِكَ لَأُغْوِيَنَّهُمْ أَجْمَعِينَ. By your honor I will misguide every one of them. Shaitan's object is to mislead mankind. At times he even utilizes avenues of good deeds to attack man and destroy him. Hassan bin Salih said, إِنَّ الشَّيْطَانَ لَيَفْتَحُ لِلْعَبْدِ تِسْعَةً وَتِسْئِينَ بَابًا مِنَ الْخَيْرِ يُرِيدُ بِهِ بَابًا مِنَ السُّوءِ. Shaitan opens 99 doors of goodness for a man, intending by it one door of evil. Shaitan's conversation with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Shaitan the accursed requested Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give him a strong snare in order to trap people. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala presented several snares before him. Shaitan eventually became very pleased at being offered women as snares. He displayed his pleasure at this snare by jumping, dancing and singing. Maulana Jalaluddin Rumi rahimahullah mentions in his Mathnavi that when Shaitan was expelled from the court of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he took an oath and said, فَبِعِزَّتِكَ لَأُغْوِيَنَّهُمْ أَجْمَعِينَ إِلَّا إِبَادِكَ مِنْهُمُ الْمُخْلَصِينَ. I take an oath by your honor that I will lead all of them astray except your devoted servants among them. Shaitan then requested that just Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give him such a strong snare with which he could trap man and from which he cannot escape. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala presented different snares before him. He first presented gold, silver and horses before him and said to him, you can trap mankind with these items. People are naturally inclined towards these things. It will therefore be easy to hunt man through these things and trap him. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, زُيِّنَ لِلنَّاسِ حُبُّ الشَّهَوَاتِ مِنَ النِّسَاءِ وَالْبَنِينَ وَالْقَنَاطِيرِ الْمُقَنطَرَةِ مِنَ الذَّهَبِ وَالْفِضَّةِ وَالْخَيْلِ الْمُسَوَّمَةِ وَالْأَنْعَامِ وَالْحَرْثِ. The love of desirable things have been deluded people. Desirable things like women, sons, hoarded treasures of gold and silver, branded horses, cattle and agriculture. Shaitan said to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, these snares of gold and silver are good, but they have become sour like lemons. The sourness has caused the lips to become puckered. When Shaitan did not like the snares of gold and silver, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala presented treasures of jewels before him. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala placed these jewels before him and said, O accursed one, here is my second offer, take it and go. Shaitan replied, O the best of helpers, give me a snare that is better than this. Like gold and silver, the snare of jewels is not very strong. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then showed him rich and sweet foods, burning drinks and expensive silk garments and said to him, here, take these snares. Shaitan replied, O master, I want snares greater than these. I must be able to fasten man with such strong ropes that he must not be able to cut and loosen them and then come running to your door. However, those who are intoxicated with your love, who are true servants of yours, whose hearts are filled with your love, they will break these ropes and shackles of mind and throw them aside. They will not turn towards gold, silver, beauty and splendor of this world. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, إِلَّا عِبَادَكَ مِنْهُمُ الْمُخْلَصِينَ, except those of them who are your devoted servants. As for the people of this world, they will fall into these traps of desires. In this way, men will be separated from the boys. I therefore require a strong snare that will separate the men from the boys. O Lord of this universe, I require a snare that will render even the men so incapable that no plot or strategy of theirs will be of any avail to them. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then presented another snare before Shaitan, and that was intoxicants, the harp and the violin. On seeing these snares before him, Shaitan became half satisfied and smiled faintly. He realized that this snare was better than the previous ones and could be of some use. However, he was only partially happy with these items, but not perfectly happy. He realized that these traps were not sufficient for universal destruction and eternal corruption. He therefore asked for yet another stronger snare. He asked Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for something of total deviation. He said, remove all the dirt and grime from the sea of tribulations, so that the people of lusts and desires will assume the sea of tribulation to be dry and a place for their feet can reside therein. And like the Coptics, meaning Fir'aun and his people, they will drown in it. Just as you made the sea a dry path for Musa alayhi salam, put up walls on either side of the path. The water collected on either side, and the sand from the depths of the sea began rising. In like manner, you should make the sea of tribulations dry for me, place it under my command, so that I can render whatever corruption I wish and be able to destroy the progeny of Adam alayhi salam. Musa alayhi salam was an exposition of your name, Al-Hadi. Make my name an exposition of your name, Al-Mudil, the one who causes to go astray. Just as you turned the Nile river into a dry bed for the guidance provided by Musa alayhi salam, and then drowned the deviated ones, in a like manner, turn the entire sea of tribulations and fitna dry for me for the perfection of misguidance. Just as the task of guidance was completed by Musa alayhi salam, complete the task of misguidance through me. Note, this knowledge which Shaitan had about the story of Musa alayhi salam before it actually took place was probably obtained by him when he looked at the Lawh al-Mahfuz, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. Shaitan then said, O Lord, give me such a strong snare that this entire affair may come to an end and the task may be completed. I must be able to place this snare like a rein across their mouths. I must entrap them in such a way that I can turn them in whichever direction I like, without them being able to turn around. I must be able to take them around in bazaars and marketplaces, so that the world may be able to see their worship of material desires and fleshy lusts. When Shaitan was not pleased with any of the previous snares, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala eventually presented the beauty and attraction of women before him. Their beauty was capable of snatching away the intellect and patience of men. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said to him, okay, take this snare. You may lead people astray through this snare and turn up the soil from the depths of the sea of tribulations.
माशाल्लाह बहुत अच्छी नसीहतें हैं, अल्लाह हमको समझ नसीब।